History rarely warns us before tragedy arrives. Sometimes it enters quietly, through a whispered rumor, a misplaced gesture, or the shadow of a man standing just a little too still. For Germanicus, the hero of Rome, the warning signs were there, but the storm came faster than anyone expected. Welcome to our 9th episode of Death of Germanicus Becomes Emperor. Let's begin our new episode. The journey into the East had changed Germanicus. He had gained friends, allies, and admirers, but he had also uncovered something else, a network of tension and political rivalry stretching from Syria to Rome itself. When he returned to Antioch after months of diplomatic travel, he sensed the shift immediately. The city felt different, not hostile, not rebellious, just watchful. Officials greeted him politely, but their eyes flickered with uncertainty. Soldiers stood straighter, but spoke cautiously. Even the air inside the governor's palace felt colder, as though conversations had recently ended the moment he entered the room. And then he saw Piso. The governor offered a greeting that felt like a performance. The smile was thin, the tone carefully neutral. Germanicus returned the courtesy, but there was no hiding the silent war between them. Every word spoken between them carried the weight of accusation. Every pause hinted at secrets neither man wished to reveal. Germanicus pushed forward. He reorganized the legions, dismissed officers who had divided loyalty, and worked to stabilize cities stretched thin by corruption and mismanagement. But Piso resisted every step, quietly, legally, strategically. He invoked imperial authority when challenged. He sent letters to Tiberius, framing Germanicus as reckless, emotional, too loved by the people for his own good. Germanicus answered with restraint. He refused to allow personal insult to derail his mission. Yet in private moments, even he admitted to his closest companions that the governor's behavior had crossed a line. He described Piso as a serpent coiled beneath a Roman cloak, dangerous, patient, waiting to strike. Then the sickness began. At first it was minor, a fever, fatigue, a faint sense of weakness, nothing unusual for a man traveling constantly through different climates. But within days the symptoms intensified. He felt stabbing pains in his stomach, a burning that spread across his limbs, waves of violent chills. Doctors studied him anxiously, offering herbs and treatments, but the illness moved faster than their remedies. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered it was poison, others claimed it was a curse. Some insisted Piso had orchestrated it, and a few dared to say that darker forces, political or supernatural, were now closing in on Germanicus. Searching for answers, Germanicus examined his room and found strange objects, ashes, bones, fragments of curses, symbols scratched into walls. Whether real or planted, the message was unmistakable. Someone wanted him to fear the shadows as much as his illness. His officers urged him to summon Piso for questioning. His friends begged him to return to Rome at once. But Germanicus refused to leave the East in chaos. Even in agony, he remained a servant of the empire, honorable, loyal, focused. Each day his strength faded. He wrote letters to Rome, to Tiberius, to his wife Agrippina. He assured them of his devotion, but beneath the lines a sense of urgency grew. He knew his time was running out. His final letter to the emperor held a tone of disappointment, not accusation, but a plea for justice if anything happened to him. Agrippina arrived too late to save him, but early enough to witness the final stage of his suffering. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, refusing to let the whispers of poison distract her from comforting him. Germanicus, barely able to speak, begged her to remain strong for their children and for Rome. As the illness reached its peak, the young general gathered his last strength. He addressed his closest companions, urging them not to let his death go unanswered. He placed his trust in his family, his soldiers, and the memory of everything he had fought to protect. Then, silently, with the dignity that had defined his life, Germanicus breathed his final breath. The East erupted in grief. Cities mourned him as though they had lost their own leader. Legions fell into disciplined silence, their loyalty unbroken even in heartbreak. But the storm was only beginning. Agrippina prepared his body for the journey back to Rome, her grief sharpening into resolve. She refused to let Germanicus's death be forgotten or dismissed. When she boarded the ship carrying her husband's ashes, crowds gathered along the harbors, kneeling as she passed. Piso, meanwhile, found himself isolated. Public fury rose against him. Officers refused to obey him. Rumors turned into accusations, accusations into demands for trial. Knowing he could not outpace the tide of vengeance, he attempted one final act to justify himself. He sent letters to Tiberius claiming innocence, framing himself as a loyal servant trapped in a misunderstanding. But even in Rome, the emperor felt the weight of the scandal. The death of Germanicus had become a wound across the empire. Piso never received the absolution he sought. As the investigation closed in, he took his own life, ending the story but not the questions. Rome would argue for generations whether he acted alone, acted with support, or acted on a misunderstanding that spiraled into tragedy. Germanicus's ashes reached Rome in a procession of unimaginable sorrow. People lined the streets for miles. Every step echoed with grief and suspicion. The beloved general had become a martyr, and his death left a void the empire would never truly fill. The consequences rippled outward. Agrippina turned her mourning into political force. The people turned their grief into anger. And Tiberius, caught between loyalty, fear, and reputation, withdrew deeper into the shadows of power. The death of Germanicus did not simply end a life. It marked the beginning of a darker era, an era where trust collapsed, paranoia grew, and the emperor's relationship with the Roman people changed forever. The rise of Tiberius had once promised stability, but with the death of Germanicus, the empire stepped into a new world, a world shaped by suspicion, political betrayal, and the slow unraveling of imperial unity. This was not just the end of a story, but the beginning of the Rome Tiberius never wished to rule.